We're here to take a deep look at fascinating topics and pull out the insights that matter for you. Today we're tackling a legend you probably think you know really well, Mulan.
Mulan.
Yeah.
The warrior woman.
Exactly. You've seen the Disney movie, maybe you've even heard of the famous Ballad of Mulan, but how much do you really know about her story?
It's actually incredible how much a single figure like Mulan can change over time. She's not this fixed point in history. Her story has been constantly reshaped. For instance, that famous ballad. It might not be nearly as old as people think.
Really?
And her surname, Hua, that wasn't even part of the original story. It came much, much later.
Okay, wow. That definitely sets the stage. So our mission today is to go way beyond the cartoon, beyond even the simple history lesson. We want to explore how Mulan's story evolved from its kind of mysterious origins right up to its modern versions.
And how it always seemed to reflect the world around it, the history, the poetry, the shifting ideas about women.
Exactly. We're going to unpack all those layers that shaped this iconic figure.
So yeah, get ready for some surprises. It's quite a journey.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning then. We're often taught the Ballad of Mulan is this ancient folk song from the Northern Dynasties, maybe 5th or 6th century China.
Right, that's the common understanding.
But you're saying maybe not. What if the poem we actually know isn't quite that old? What's the thinking there?
Well, this is where it gets interesting. It's a bit like literary archaeology. You have to dig through the layers. Now, the theme of woman warrior, yeah, that was popular back in the Northern Dynasties.
Yeah.
We even have a couple of Mulan poems listed in Song Dynasty collections centuries later. But the specific poem we all know and love, the one with those really famous, powerful lines, it shows pretty strong signs of being well-polished. Maybe even significantly rewritten by poets from the Tang Dynasty, which is later.
The Tang Dynasty, so 7th to 10th century-ish?
Exactly. And, many scholars back in the Song Dynasty who were closer to that Tang period, they already thought of it as a Tang poem, not necessarily an ancient folk song.
Okay, so what's the evidence? What's the first clue pointing towards the Tang Dynasty poets having a hand in this? Is it the style?
Absolutely. The style is a huge clue. Think about those lines from the ballad we know. 1,000 miles to the battlefield she sped, over mountains and passes, swift as flight. Northern winds carry the clatter of metal watches. Cold light shines on iron armor. Generals die in 100 battles. Brave soldiers return after 10 years. It's very refined, heroic, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's powerful.
Now, compare that to actual known Northern Dynasties folk songs, like the Chile Plain. The plain where the Chile people live is at the foot of the Yinshan Mountains. The sky is like a herdsman's tent covering all directions of the earth.
Okay, simple, direct. Very different feel.
Or another one, driving sheep into the valley. Driving the sheep into the valley. The white sheep walk in front. The elderly girl is still unmarried, stamping her feet and calling out to the heavens. Again, very plain, straightforward.
Wow, the contrast is really stark when you put them side by side. The Mulan ballad sounds so much more polished, sophisticated.
Exactly. That's the key question. How does this incredibly elegant, heroic language, this delicate elegance with heroic boldness, emerge from a period known for much simpler folk poetry? It feels very Tang Dynasty, almost like, the great poet Li Bai.
So you think Tang poets might have sort of upgraded an older story?
Or perhaps even composed it, drawing on older themes. Tang poets were masters of imitation. They can make their own sophisticated works sound like older folk styles. It's likely not just a folk song passed down untouched. It feels like a literary masterpiece shaped by Tang sensibilities.
Like a kind of historical literary camouflage. Okay, that's clue number one. But you mentioned something else, bureaucratic details, acting as a smoking gun.
Ah, yes.
Yeah.
This is where it gets really specific and I think quite convincing. The poem says Mulan is awarded 12 ranks of merit and turns down the job of Shangshulang.
Right, I remember that part. Sounds like details to show how amazing she was.
They do that, but they're historically specific details. If you look at the actual history of government ranks, well, the Northern Zhou and Sui dynasties, where the story supposedly originates, they only had 11 ranks for military merit officials. 11.
Not 12?
No, it was the Tang Dynasty that introduced the 12-rank system.
Whoa, okay.
And Shangshulang, that wasn't just a random title. It was specifically a 5th-rank official position in the Tang bureaucracy. Exactly the kind of administrative job someone with 12 ranks of military merit would be transferred into.
So the details don't just sound impressive, they actually match the Tang system perfectly. Like finding a Tang Dynasty coin in a supposedly older setting.
Precisely. It's like a historical timestamp embedded in the poem. These details, even if exaggerated for effect, they point squarely at Tang Dynasty influence, or even origin, for the ballad as we know it.
So the Mulan ballad we cherish is likely a Tang creation, building on older legends. That really reframes things.
So she's already a figure built up over time, layer by layer.
And her evolution didn't stop there, right? Even her name, Hua Mulan. You mentioned earlier that the Hua part isn't in the original ballad.
That's right. It's another layer added later.
Yeah.
It really shows how stories morph like that game of telephone, picking up new bits along the way. The surname Hua, which means flower, probably came from poetic association. Specifically, connections made by the famous Tang poet Bai Jui.
By Dewey. How did he connect flowers to Mulan?
Well, he wrote poems about magnolia flowers, which in Chinese are called Mulan Hua, and he explicitly linked them to the warrior Mulan. He talked about their feminine charm, but also their resilience.
Ah, so it was a poetic wordplay that eventually stuck. Do you have an example?
Sure. In one poem, playful inscription on magnolia flowers, he calls them girl flowers, and then adds, they also wear armor to fight in battle.
Okay, I see the connection.
And in another, inscription on magnolia flowers at Ling Hu's home, he says something like, these flowers are like Mulan, mixing beauty and strength. It's a lovely image, really. It just wasn't part of the earliest known version. It caught on and became part of who we think she is.
So a poetic nickname becomes her actual name over time. Fascinating. But okay, beyond the text and her name, how did people in the Tang Dynasty actually see Mulan? Was she just a story character?
Oh, she was definitely more than just a character. There's evidence she was genuinely revered. Like, people built temples to her.
Temples, really?
Yeah. We know this from another Tang poet, Du Mu. He wrote a poem called Inscription on Mulan's Temple. It shows ordinary people were worshipping her. She wasn't just folklore. She was a fellow of respect, maybe even devotion.
What does Du Mu's poem say about her?
It's quite moving, actually. It depicts her on the battlefield, still grappling with her identity. He wrote, bending her bow, she fought as a man, yet in dreams she once painted her eyebrows.
Wow, that captures the duality.
Right, and he continues. Time and again longing to return, she raised her cup on Fuyun Mound, praying to bright concubine, Zhao Jun.
Praying to Wang Zhaojun, another famous woman from history who served the country.
Exactly. It shows this sense of female solidarity, recognizing the sacrifice and the inner conflict of women contributing in unconventional ways. It's a really rich, complex view of her.
That's a powerful image. But then things seem to change. You mentioned earlier that later, from the Song Dynasty onwards, the focus shifts dramatically. Storytellers become obsessed with her. Chastity.
Yeah, this is where the narrative takes a really uncomfortable turn. It reflects a big cultural shift, a much more conservative attitude towards women starting around the 10th century and getting stronger through the Ming and Qing periods. Mulan, this woman who lived and fought among men, became a sort of focal point for anxieties about female virtue.
How did that play out in the stories? You said there were tests.
Right. Basically, later versions added these plot points designed to prove her purity. The first big one was what happened after the war. The emperor finds out she's a woman.
And he's impressed, right? Offers her rewards.
Yes, but in these later stories, he also wants her as a concubine. And Mulan's response, she commits suicide.
She kills herself. Why?
She declares that a loyal subject cannot marry their sovereign. Her suicide becomes the ultimate proof of her loyalty and her sexual purity. It's how she earns the title General, Filial, and Valiant in those versions, by dying to protect her virtue.
That's drastically different from returning home. And the second test?
The second was this constant, almost obsessive questioning of how she possibly remained undiscovered among soldiers for 12 years. The implication was that if she had been discovered, her chastity would inevitably have been compromised.
It sounds incredibly intrusive.
It was, and they added these bizarre, anachronistic details to explain it, like stories where she has to carefully hide her tiny bound feet.
Bound feet. But foot binding wasn't common practice back in the Northern Dynasties, was it?
Not at all. It became widespread much, much later, mainly from the Song Dynasty onwards.
Yeah.
So they're literally inserting a later custom back into her story, just to create another scenario focused on hiding her femininity and, by extension, protecting her chastity. It makes no historical sense.
So they're rewriting history to fit their own concerns. Did it get worse in the Ming and Qing dynasties?
Oh, definitely. Writers like Xu Wei and Chu Renhu really leaned into this.
Yeah.
You get plots where Mulan has to formally report upon her return that her chastity is intact. Like it's an official debriefing point.
Seriously?
Yeah. Or even darker storylines where her father gets so depressed by all the nasty rumors circulating about what she might have done while she was away as a female soldier, they actually dies from shame.
That's incredibly bleak. It feels like they're punishing her for her heroism.
It feels oppressive, exactly.
Yeah.
Because it reflects the grim reality of that period. There was a lot of violence against women by soldiers, and frankly, many women associated with armies were camp followers or prostitutes, not warriors. So these storytellers twisted Mulan's narrative into this rigid, almost impossible ideal of purity, maybe as a way to counteract that reality. But it really suffocates the original spirit of her story. It becomes less about heroism and more about enforcing a specific restrictive female morality.
It's disturbing how a story of strength could be warped like that, but thankfully it didn't stay stuck there forever, right? You mentioned the May 4th movement in the early 20th century?
Yes, the Republican era. This was a time of huge change in China, rethinking everything: tradition, culture, gender roles. It was a chance to rediscover and reimagine figures like Mulan.
A rebirth, almost.
Exactly. A chance to create a Mulan for a new era.
And one really striking example was a 1928 play, The Female Valiant by Zuo Ganchen. This sounds like a radical departure.
Oh, absolutely radical. In this version, Mulan doesn't just join the army out of duty to her father or emperor. She has a conscious goal: to prove that women are just as capable as men, to fight for women's potential.
So it's explicitly feminist from the start.
Pretty much. And her personal life is complex, too. She has a relationship with a male military doctor, but she also faces a marshal who tries to force her into marriage. It's not a simple heroic arc.
It sounds much more modern, dealing with relationships and power dynamics.
It really is. And it asks us, what does it mean to be a hero? Her awakening is intense. There's this moment where her lover, the doctor, fails her. He doesn't protect her and even doubts her chastity after everything.
And how does she react?
She delivers this incredible line. She basically says, we don't need husbands. If having a husband only means adding a yoke over our heads or a closer but false friend, then why must we have husbands?
Wow, in 1928, that's rejecting the whole foundation of traditional marriage.
It's incredibly powerful. A really defiant stance against patriarchy that makes a lot of later feminist statements seem, frankly, kind of mild in comparison. She's not just asking for equality, she's questioning the entire structure.
So what happens to her in this version? Does she return home?
No. She doesn't commit suicide like in the Ming King versions, and she doesn't just go back to domestic life. She chooses her own path. She leaves with a foreign princess to find a better, freer world outside the constraints of the society she knew.
A truly independent choice. Okay, so from that radical Mulan, let's jump to the one most people listening probably know best. Disney's 1998 animated film.
Yes, Disney's Mulan.
It's definitely a Western take full of historical glitches, but it just works somehow. It connects with people globally. What's the magic there?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because despite taking all sorts of liberties with history, the Disney film actually taps into some really deep traditional Chinese cultural values, sometimes in ways even Chinese filmmakers haven't quite captured.
Like what? Give me an example.
Okay, take the emperor. In the Disney film, he's this perfect embodiment of Confucian ideals for a ruler. He's benevolent, he cares deeply about his people's safety, he's loyal to his principles. Remember that line? Only when the year grows cold do we know that the pine and cypress are the last to wither.
Yeah, very stoic and wise. He seems quite quiet, though, not very active.
Exactly. And that itself is interesting. He understands human nature, like when Mulan gives him that awkward hug, he sees her sincerity. He tells Li Shang to go after her, showing Shu that Confucian idea of empathy and forgiveness. Even seeming a bit useless or passive aligns with Confucius's idea of the ideal ruler. The North Star stays in its place, and all other stars revolve around it. He leads through moral example, not brute force.
Huh. I never thought of it that way. He's like a character straight out of the Analects.
Pretty much. And it's striking because you rarely see emperors portrayed quite like that in many Chinese historical dramas. Usually they're more about power struggles or grandeur. Disney made him kind, principled, maybe a little ineffective in action, but deeply respectable and lovable.
That's a really insightful point. And it's not just him, is it? What about Mulan's father?
No, her father. That scene where he gets the conscription notice, despite his injured leg, he accepts it with such dignity, ready to go and die for his country. That's a truly powerful moment for his character.
It really is.
And it's something you almost never see in the centuries of Chinese Mulan stories before Disney. Often, the father is just portrayed as old and frail, a victim of circumstance, or later, someone dying of shame. Disney gave him this quiet nobility, which makes Mulan's motivation so much clearer and more moving.
And Mulan herself in the Disney version, she struggles, right? She's not instantly amazing at being a soldier.
Right, she physically struggles to keep up, which is a reality many women would face. But she doesn't win through sheer strength alone. She uses her intelligence, her perception, her ability to mediate between the guys, her problem-solving skills like with the avalanche.
Yeah, using the cannon.
Yeah,
Clever.
exactly. It makes her heroism about wit, perseverance, and character, not just fighting ability. And that makes her story relatable to all modern people worldwide, as the analysis put it. She's a leader who uses her mind. That resonates everywhere.
So tracing this whole arc is incredible. We started with a ballad whose origins are murky, likely polished or written in the Tang Dynasty.
Then saw her become a revered figure in Tang temples, grappling with her identity.
Only to be kind of hijacked by later dynasties obsessed with proving her chastity, leading to some really dark story versions.
Followed by this radical feminist rebirth in the 20th century, challenging patriarchy head-on.
And finally, landing with Disney's global blockbuster, which, despite everything, managed to capture some profound traditional wisdom alongside universal themes.
It really shows how enduring stories aren't static. They live and breathe and change with the times. Mulan is less a single historical figure and more a continuous cultural conversation.
It's such a powerful reminder, isn't it? That our heroes evolve. They reflect us. They challenge us. It makes you think what other ancient stories might be out there, waiting for a new interpretation, waiting for a retelling that speaks to our world today, maybe uncovering things we've forgotten or challenging ideas we take for granted.
That's a fascinating question to ponder. The next Mulan, so to speak, might be hidden in a story we think we already know.
Maybe so. Well, thank you for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the many faces of Mulan.
If you found this discussion useful, maybe learned something new, definitely hit that subscribe button. We do these deep dives regularly, exploring valuable ideas.
We appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, thanks for joining us.